Okay, so yeah, that worked. I'm glad you could see my hands and everything. That was what I was worried about. So let's move on from there. It takes a real long time to upload these things, at least from my poor equipment. So in between, there's going to be stuff happening. And what I did here was put down a line of red, or an area of red. And when it dried, I went over it with other colors. And this is called glazing. And this is something that you can use in your work. But you have to wait until the bottom area dries, because if you don't, look what happened here. I got it too wet, and it picked up the paint in there, so it got kind of whitish. This is the same color as this, and in here it lifted the paint. Over here it was dry. Of course it's lighter over here, but the point is it should be blending. It should be a transparent blend. When you really get into the paints, you're going to find that some of them are transparent and some of them are opaque. And if you don't know what opaque means, it means that light can't pass through it. Now, this looks a little more opaque. You see, it didn't blend much. There's not much difference between here and here. But these are obviously transparent, particularly the ultramarine blue. And they'll pass over each other. So a fun thing to do if you're just starting out is to make some lines like these that we did in the beginning. And then take your, I better put that back up there because I know that was lined up. Take your paints, take your wet paints. After these are all nice and dry, this is not dry over here because I was messing around, but after it's all nice and dry, get some paint and just do a quick stroke over. Don't scrub or it'll lift up. So just do a quick stroke over it, and you can see how the addition of the yellow to the blue makes it kind of a green. And now that is a cerulean blue. It's kind of like a sea blue, ocean blue. Down here, this is ultramarine. And don't worry about the names of things. You'll get to that later. But let's see what happens with this blue. With the same yellow, I'm going to go over this blue. There's a little, well, that's dry. Here, we'll go over the intense part of it. And you can see it's a different green that it makes. You see that? Here's the ultramarine in a lighter. There you go. So you can see the different things that happen. So what you can do for fun when you're learning and get more, acquainted with your paints, take some iteration of the primaries, red, yellow, blue, and then take all of your paints, whatever you happen to have, and go over them and see what it makes. And then you'll understand a little better what the paints are going to do. So I wanted to also show you something that I used to do when I was a kid. I'll talk more about what's happening here later. But something I used to do when I was a kid was do this wet on wet. I love doing this. Like I do the wet on wet and I drop it in there and let it dry. Now this isn't dry yet. And then when it was dry, I'd come back in with a pen or a fine tip marker or something, and I'd find all the creatures in there. Like if this dries, I see some kind of like a moth here, or maybe a dove or an angel. You see that? No? And up here, maybe it has a little headdress. No? And you can use your, it's like looking at the clouds. So that's a really fun way to play with these paints. All right. Now, how do we use this in a real painting? We did wet on dry. I showed you how to use the pointed brush. Excuse me. So we did wet on dry. We did wet on wet. We did some glazing. Those are 3 things you can do. We did a little lifting. I showed you how to lift in the middle of this a moment ago, and I'll show you again. There it goes. See that? Sucking it right up. That one has settled in a little bit. What happens with paint when it's laying on paper is that these paper fibers are, this is cotton, this particular paper, and the fibers are kind of mashed together and laid on top of each other. And when paint lays on top of it for a while, it'll soak down into those fibers. Now at first, when you put the paint on it, it's not soaking in yet because there's something called sizing holding it together. The sizing softens up when it gets wet, and that's when the paint dives down into it a little bit more and kind of integrates with those fibers, and that makes it harder for it to lift up. So if I wanted to clean my brush and come over to this wet paint, it'd be pretty easy to lift that up. But if I clean my brush and go to some dry paint, it's not so easy. You can do it, but you can only do it by wetting the paint. See that? Drying out your brush. Where's my cloth? And then coming back in and then trying to lift it. And it won't always work, because sometimes it will already have gone in there. It's working pretty good here. Sometimes it will already have soaked in so far that you won't be able to lift it. But again, that depends upon the body of the paint, the amount of pigment, which is the colored part, usually made from minerals, the amount of pigment in the paint, and how deep it has gone into the paper. About paper, I said I'd get back to that. There are several different types of paper. You will notice on the front of the tablet, let me, I'm going to have to lift this one up, I guess. You'll notice in the front of the tablet, it's going to say cold pressed or hot pressed. I don't want to get this all wet, but let's see. Look, watercolor paper, cold press. Cold press means it has texture, like that. Hot press, which really I prefer, is very smooth. I don't have, or do I? I do. Here's a piece of hot press. Can you see the difference between those two? What that does is, if you're going to do any dry brushing, and I didn't cover dry brushing yet, but if you're going to do any dry brushing, you'll see more white on the cold press, because if you had a microscope and looked down in there, you know, you got to the level of this would be a bunch of little mountains. The surface of the paper would look like mountains, and this would be a plain. This would be flat. This is Illinois, and this is Colorado. Okay, so here's what would happen. Here's dry brushing. You take paint on your brush, and you get rid of most of it. You can do that on your cloth too, or do it in some other part of your painting. And then you take that brush and you just skim over the surface. See that? See all those Colorado mountains coming up there? That is dry brush. And you will eventually understand your brushes well enough to know what type of amount of wetness you have. Just play with it. Just play with it all. This is just paper. You can't mess up. This is just paper. Any project you make is just paper. So play with it. I can go back over here and grab a little more of this wet paint and do a little more. And what would I do with this? Well, if I was doing a mountain scene, I'd get a little bit of paint on my brush, and I might start with a little bit of a rock face, you know, and then maybe once I had that rock face in, maybe it would go off into the snow like that. Okay, if you can imagine. And it doesn't have to be in a line. It can be all, you know, you can doodle. You can mess around with that. But if you can see that as the top of a rock sticking out of snow, and then the snow beneath it, and just play with your brush. And again, never push, always sideways or pull. All right. I could take a little bit more paint. I'll go back into the palette instead. And I could bring out the top of that rock with a little more paint. I could, you know, make that a little more intense up there. And now here's the wet on wet thing. That's not wet there yet because that dried real quickly, but the paint I just put down is wet. I can get a wet brush, and I can just come in and drag some of that down if I want to, like that. You see that? How that drags down? Yeah, so there's a lot of tricks you can play. And if I wanted to, I could dry my brush. And let's say the sun is up here. And maybe I want to put a little bit of a reflection on that side. Yeah. So there, you know, a mountain. We've got Colorado, we've got the mountain, we're good to go. We've got Mothra, down here. Oops. Okay, now, how do you use this in a practical manner? Well, let me move this out of the way. I started a really beginning part of a face last night. Just sketched it down, and just a generic face. I don't know who she is. It's just somebody from my mind. I'm just going to leave that there so it holds it flat. Along those lines, if you don't like your paper curving up like this, take painter's tape like this and tape it to a surface that you can move, like a drawing board. Sometimes I'll use a big book and just tape it to the book cover so that the sides are taped down, and it'll keep it from buckling. And I'll show you that later when we do a project, but right now I'm just going to tack it down so it doesn't move a lot. And this painter's tape is nice because it peels up very easily. And if you like, you can get an edge around things. When I do Christmas cards or anything like that, I like to have an edge. I'll show you one of them later. We're going to do a bird later, and I will show you that. All right, so here I did wet on dry. And up here you can see a little wet on wet. I put a little more color there. All right. How would I work with this from here? Well, first of all, I really should go clean my water, but I'm not going to do that because I'm just going to start. You should keep your water clean. Don't do what I do, you know, do what I say. Anyway, typical mom, right? So here, oops, I have the color here already. If I want to put in some shadow and I want that shadow to blend, I would wet the area first. I'll show you two different approaches. I would wet the area first. Now, what I'm going to do is mix my color, and you'll get better at that as you go. And if you like, we can go into color theory, and I can teach you some of that. But I'm just going to take a little bit of this brown and mix it with a little bit of the purple here to get a shadow kind of color that I like. If I do wet on dry and I put a shadow in, now my brush is full of paint, and this is dry. And I can just come in, and I know where the shadow is going to go, and just do a nice light shadow like that. You know, come down like that. Now the shadow has hard edges. If you like that, you can leave it alone. That's fine. If you don't like that, you can wet your brush, and you can come in there and just with a little bit of moisture in your brush, soften that edge like that. See? Just soften it. Don't scrub, because if you do, you'll damage the surface of the paper. By scrubbing, I mean really la 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 like that. Don't worry about it. Just half the beauty of watercolor is the marks that you make when you're not expecting to make them. Like here, you know. That's what watercolor is all about. All right, so there's wet on dry, and I can do layer upon layer upon layer of that if I want to. If I want it to spread a little more, like let's look at this neck area. I could come in with water, and being careful where I put the water, because the paint will follow the water. Just moisten that area first. And I could take some of that color, and it's very light, but maybe I'll darken it just a little since it's under the neck there. Now I have water here, and I'm going to put a little bit of that color in. And you'll see it'll already have a soft edge because of the moisture I put down below it. All right. And knowing that it's soft already like that, and it's still wet, I can come in with a little more. I'm going to get a little bit more of the brown here to make this shadow a little darker up here, and drop that in. You can just do a little dabble at a time like that. And while it's wet, you can still work with it. So if I, all right, I taught you what to do about that. Gotta suck it up. Okay. We'll spatter at the end anyway. That'll, see, don't worry about it. It's paper. All right, now, so this is still wet, and I can go ahead and get a little more brown. And this time I have a lot of brown on my brush. And I know the shadow is going to be darker up here, so I'll drop a little more in there. We'll talk about what colors to choose for shadows if you want to get into color mixing. it's not always black in a shadow. It's not always brown. There are a lot of theories about that, and I'll be happy to share that with you. And I'm just going to blend this out a little bit like this, you know, with the moist brush. I could dab some more in there. And then I could come under the chin with the shadow, and so on. So you see, I've got the wet on dry, got the wet on wet, got the wet on dry here, the color mixing with the skin tone. I could take my brush, and right now, since everything's dry, I could put in an eyebrow. I probably wouldn't do that until the end, but I'm going to show you how to use the brush to get the shapes properly. Knowing the pressure of the brush, I could start maybe a little thicker here and do my eyebrow, and she's going to look kind of incongruous. There, look at that. And it's got the little point there. You could come in with some little, maybe she's got a little bit of a thicker eyebrow. See those tiny points? And I could let that dry. And if I didn't like it, like I don't like those two little spikes there, I'm moistening my brush and I'm going to suck them right up again. There. Okay. So there are a few more things for you to learn. I'm going to upload this one, and I will see how far along we are with what we have. What else you need to know? Things like this, if you know you're going to do a background, don't sweat it. That's going to cover right up. You know, don't worry about playing with your paper to try to get that up. It's not a big deal. Another hint, though, if you don't want to see your pencil lines, erase them before you come in with your paint, because once your paint is over, it kind of seals them in there. So I know you're going to want to see them to know where to put the paint, but you can get them down, like here, there's no paint on top of it. You can get them down really, really low like that. And I'm not pushing real hard because I don't want to damage the surface of the paper. But when it's really light, you can still see it. And then you can work with it. Whereas if I tried to get this pencil line up here, it might be, you see, I'm pushing a little harder. It's not going to come up like the other one did. That's going to be there. And I'm okay with that because I know I'm going to have a lot of pigment. I like nice dark paintings. Lot of we can also talk about that, a lot of value. All right. Let me know where you want to go, and I will try to upload more tomorrow. Bye.